Rent is becoming more and more unaffordable for so many Nevadans. Right now, lawmakers are looking at a bill that could cap rent increases.
But there are several exemptions in the bill that have lots of people debating who should be able to raise the rent and when. Mike Allen joins us now to break down those exemptions. Mike.
Yes, well, I've listened to quite a lot of debate on this bill. Everybody who testified is in favor of lowering rent prices, but of course there is a lot of debate over who should be exempt from this bill. I want to point you in the direction of two exemptions in particular.
We need more homes.
Ask a handful of people what they think will solve the housing affordability crisis in Nevada and surrounding states, and chances are you'll hear a lot about increasing housing supply.
If you put these caps, you are going to hinder investment. And if you hinder investment, it's going to exacerbate the supply and demand issues that we have here in Nevada.
The Neighborhood Stabilization Act would put caps on rent increases, but it has an exemption for new construction so as not to disincentivize adding to the supply of homes in Nevada. Some who testified against the bill, though, say that won't solve the issue of big investors gobbling up more property.
The out-of-state multi-billion-dollar Wall Street hedge fund that you're really mad at won't feel a bump.
Another exemption is for landlords that put money into the property.
This is a very reasonable model for rental properties, which will help neighborhoods throughout the state maintain and increase quality of life.
John Solomon, who's a landlord, supports the bill. He says being allowed to raise rent in the event of renovations and unexpected maintenance makes the bill workable for him.
This will encourage other landlords to do the same.
Another person who gave testimony recalled a conversation with a man whose rent, she says, went from $900 to $1,200 with no improvements to his home.
I said, "Did you get new appliances?" He's like, "No, Miss Martinez, I did not." I said, "Did you get new flooring?" He's like, "No, Miss Martinez, I did not." I said, "Did they paint your house?" He's like, "No." He goes, "Actually, it's getting deteriorated because it's getting older because they have not done that."
A couple other notable exemptions. The cap does not apply to units that are owned by government agencies and also does not apply to tenants who are getting help from the government to pay their rent already. I've got the other exemptions broken down on our website, fox5vegas.com. Reporting live, Mike Allen, Fox 5 News, local Las Vegas.
Yeah, tough for so many people, but you might be surprised to learn rental prices have leveled off over the last year after rising during the pandemic and have even dropped in some cases. This data from rent.com shows the price of a studio apartment here in Las Vegas has gone up by $15 a month over the last year, with rents for 1- and 2-bedroom apartments going down by $87 and $103 respectively.